One of the biggest mistakes that I see new gardeners making is trusting that when they buy a plant at the garden center after it's been restocked for the spring, that it is okay to go ahead and immediately plant that outside in their garden. And unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that the garden center does not have your best interests at heart. Their job is to sell you plants. Specifically, they're going to be stocking the plants that you are expecting to see, not necessarily the plants that are going to do super well for your area or even at the right time. So today, as we're going through our garden planning process, what I really want to focus on is teaching you how to determine when certain plants need to be planted outside, and then use that information to actually make a garden plan that is going to be successful. If you are new here, we are in the middle of a free beginner gardening course. If you haven't seen the rest of the videos, check the link below and you will be able to catch up on everything so far. But basically what we're doing is we're going through from start to finish, planning your garden, and then also I'm going to help you throughout the year with the kind of maintenance and going through the thought processes that you need to continue to have a successful garden all year. So as we've talked about in earlier videos, the two main categories of plants are annuals and perennials. And the timing for when these things need to be planted is going to be a little bit different. So perennials, if you'll remember, these are the plants that live for multiple years. You plant them once and then they usually survive the winter and come back all on their own in the spring, and then they'll do that for several years, anywhere from like 3 to 20 or even more years, depending on what it is you've planted. Most of the time, you're going to be planting these out for the first time as started plants, although there are a few that you may run into starting from seed if you're going for especially more niche varieties. But usually for a perennial, you'll be buying a started plant or you'll be buying a bulb for like a bulbing flower. And these usually would go out in either the spring or kind of the early fall after the heat of summer has started to die down. So if you're following along in the course and if you're following along in the planner, even if you're in your own notebook, what I want you to do is go through your list of perennials from earlier, and I want you to figure out what form they usually come in when you buy them, whether you're more likely to buy them as a live started plant, as a seed, or as like a bulb or rhizome or something like that. And then look up the recommendations on when to put those in the ground. So some common examples just from my garden. My strawberry crowns, I put those in the spring. I planted my grapevines and my hardy kiwi vines in the spring. I also planted my outdoor citrus in the spring. And in the fall, I planted my saffron crocus bulbs, which these are actually a type of crocus that blooms in the fall, and it actually makes the little saffron threads, if you've ever seen those. So that's really cool, but that is a specifically fall planter. And then a lot of perennial onions and other alliums would be planted in the fall as well. So just for everything that you've got on your list, make sure that you have an idea of what form you would be planting it in, and again, when exactly you need to do that. All right, so then we're going to move on to the annual side of things. I think this is just a little bit more complex, partially because you have to do it every year. Even though that does give you flexibility to move where you put them every year, it's not as much of a commitment. But there are a bunch of different ways that you can be planting your annuals. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, spring is usually the time that you would see a bunch of started plants for the annuals get put out at the garden center. And what you'll find is a lot of the time these go out way earlier than they need to, because people are already kind of getting in the mode of spring. You know, the air starts warming up and the trees start making their little buds, and people forget that it is still very occasionally dropping below freezing at night. So if you were to buy your tomato starts, in my area, if you were to buy them in March, even the end of March, and put them outside immediately, there's a good chance that there would still be a frost that comes through and kills those plants. And that's what the garden center doesn't really warn you about. And so with annuals, you have that option of buying the started plant, which is something that I would generally recommend you do for your first year gardening, first or second year, unless you have just a ton more energy to spend on actually doing all of that seed starting yourself, which we will get way deeper into in the next video. So if that's something that you want to pursue, I am here for you. I got you. I'm going to explain every little step of it. You will absolutely be able to do that. So if you want to go through the seed catalogs and buy everything on your list and have a lot of fun doing that, we can do that in the next video. But what you're going to need to do for now is actually look into whether or not the seeds or the plants that you are trying to grow need to be started indoors, first of all, or whether or not they can actually be direct sown. And for those of you who are going to go with the easier started plants route, you are also potentially going to have some things on your list that will still need to be started from seed that you generally won't be able to find started plants for. And this is even some really common things. Like the biggest thing I can think of is beans or carrots, radishes, things like that. You're not going to find started plants for in the store. And as you are going through and looking up when each of these different plants should be started, you're going to run into kind of two main camps of annual plants, and that's going to be the stuff that needs to be planted in the spring and the stuff that needs to be planted in the fall. And this is another mistake that I see a lot of gardeners making because of the garden centers, is they will put out plants that are supposed to be planted in the fall in the spring for you, just because a lot of people expect those plants to be there and don't know that they will actually do so much better in the fall. So taking the time now to go through your list and make sure you know what the recommended planting schedule is for each of these, it's going to help you kind of conceptualize where everything is going to go in your garden. Because if you are trying to have, like, for example, tomatoes and carrots in your garden this year, you could theoretically plant those in the same exact spot because they're not going to need the garden at the same time. And if thinking about planning like that, it feels a little too overwhelming for you, you absolutely don't have to do that this year. You can just focus on your spring garden and then take a break over the fall and the winter and come back to it again next year and figure out if you can then expand your garden. All right, so to recap, because I know I just threw a lot of information at you, what I want you to do for your annuals is I want you to find out, one, are they usually started indoors ahead of time or direct seeded into the garden? If they are started indoors ahead of time normally, you then get to decide, are you going to start a plant that somebody else started for you, or are you going to start it yourself? And if it is one of the ones that needs to be direct seeded, then you are definitely going to have to do that yourself, buy the seeds and plant them yourself. From there, I then want you to go ahead and figure out exactly when that plant is going to be safe to go out in your garden. This is almost always going to be talked about in reference to your last frost in the spring. It is either going to be somewhat slightly before that or somewhat slightly after that. And, you know, different plants will have slightly different requirements and tolerances for temperature, like we talked about previously. But the internet is going to do a really good job leading you through the information of exactly when each specific plant that is on your list can go outside. And then lastly, while you are looking through all of this timing for each of your plants, I want you to just note down the approximate time that this plant will be ready to harvest. We are going to use that information later, and again, this is also going to help you inform exactly where you're going to place things in your garden when we get to actually drawing it out. We are getting so close to the actually very fun part of garden planning, where you actually get to look at the design of your garden and decide this plant goes here and this plant goes here. I promise we have just a little bit more of prep work to do, and then we will be there. So hang in there. I think you will be so glad that you did all of this prep work and got all of these different things together in your head, because it is going to make the actual planning part just such a breeze. And again, if you need to catch up with previous lessons, they will be linked down below. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss any lessons, then do make sure that you are subscribed. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I will see you in the next video.